This is good. All right, are you good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, as I said, I'm Chris Walker, and total amateur at this. I found Christopher Alexander a couple years ago. My goal in this presentation is to get you all to kind of feel why he was so exciting to me, and then hopefully to get some of you interested in reading his works and then eventually applying them. And so before we dive into it, who here has read anything by Christopher Alexander? Okay, so 3, excellent. He's great. So how did I find out about this in the first place? Does anyone know Simon Saris? He's, okay, of course this guy does. He's sort of an internet personality, and he built this little house, and he shared a blog on what he did and how he did it. And it struck me. I was like, this house is not like other houses. So there it is. And if you look at that house, it was built in 2018, but you can't really tell, right? It could have been built in 1918, or maybe not 1818, but it just has like a really simple form. It's geometric, it's regular. There's something really beautiful about it. And then on the inside, right, okay, so this was my exposure to the first time to veneer plaster, right? So the house was finished with veneer plaster on the inside. And if you look at the surface of the wall, like this looks like the kind of photo you would see in like 1800 Italy, not 2018 United States, New Hampshire. And then there's other things that are done, like it's a very traditional farmhouse kitchen, and he actually found a bunch of very old glass doorknobs and started putting them all over his house. And so I got talking to him online, and I said, hey Simon, like what's up with this? Like what books would you recommend to get into this? And then immediately he gave me a couple in mind, and one of them was definitely Everything by Christopher Alexander. So I ordered those, and then I got to see them applied a little bit in North Idaho for the first time, because my in-laws built a house in 2021, following again Simon Saris's blog, and then some of the same principles. And so you're gonna laugh because this looks so similar. Right? It's the Idaho version of the Simon Saris house. Now, like there's architectural issues here, but it was built on an incredibly good budget of $150 a square foot.
Wow.
Yes, and it's like pretty well furnished on the inside. And look, I mean, it's literally the same sink. And so you start to get some of the same patterns at play here, and then you have the same principles of open shelves. And so I got more and more into like reading all the Christopher Alexander stuff and then figuring out how to apply it. And then eventually, kind of spontaneously, we found a property and had an opportunity to apply it here. And so I want to walk through what's so interesting about Alexander, some of the principles that have really struck me, and then give you kind of a case study with a couple shots of how we've put them into practice. So who's this Christopher Alexander guy? I didn't really know how impressive he was until I was doing some research for this talk. He is a professor at UC Berkeley. Now the Berkeley fact is kind of a strike against him. He's an architect. He built or helped build over 100 buildings. And then he wrote a ton of incredibly interesting books, of which I've only read A Pattern Language and The Timeless Way of Building. But a lot of folks say that The Nature of Order and some of these other books are better and more interesting. And then some of the ideas he had, he's like a pure intellectual, and then who applies his intellectualism. They've been used in software design as well. So the concept of a pattern language and an anti-pattern, it ends up being a phrase that you hear in software development, which has nothing to do with his original field of architecture. So this guy's a polymath, quite a remarkable fellow. He has more degrees from more fancy institutions than I care to even list. So if you're into that thing, he's impressive. So the book that people recommend you start with is called The Timeless Way of Building. And it's, as you get into this book, it's a quasi-religious experience if you get it. And it was for me, where you start turning the pages and you realize, I had this feeling about some buildings and I had this distaste for other buildings, and I couldn't really put it into words. And then he helps you take your perceptions and then put them into words about like what makes an excellent building, what makes an excellent process. And so, this is sort of like a vague, interesting philosophical quote he's got here. But I tried to condense the timeless way of building, as I recall it, into a couple simple principles. So the first thing is it's generative. Rather than giving you rules, like certain other architecture schools will do, like, hey, this is the Corinthian column, right? He says nothing about the orders of columns in Corinthian versus Doric or whatever. He gives you simple rubrics or rules that you can use to apply to a location or problem at hand, and then cobble those rules together to build the end solution. It's iterative in the sense that, like Stuart Brand mentions, excellent cities, excellent buildings are arrived at over time. They don't just fall out of the sky perfectly formed. You go through a process to sort of rough the thing out, build the initial form, add on to it later, add the detail. It's sort of like a fractal, where as it gets put together, you go deeper and deeper and deeper into the finer levels of detail. But the rough structure is beginning to take shape from the very beginning. It's human in the sense that all of the principles that Alexander mentions are based on psychological or philosophical needs. It's like humanism in the good sense. Like, what does a human need? How do people work? What makes them feel at home? And he goes really, really deep into some of these things. And then, he'll have like some overwrought statements like, it is not possible for a human to like be an excellent person in this room unless there's an exterior staircase. And you're like, that might be a bit of a stretch. But for the most part, he, I think, is a really good judge of human character, needs, and just the way we work. It's local, colloquial, and tacit. And what I mean by these last three is the timeless way of building is really different than how we build today. Because today, building is specialized. If you want a building, you hire an architect. The architect works with the GC, and the GC has subs, and at the end of the day, you get a building, hopefully. That's not how buildings worked for most of history, right? It was much more local people doing things with and for themselves. I mean, you think about the Amish doing barn building, and rather than having these very well-defined building codes, it was more, this is how we do things here. This is how we've always done things here, right? It worked for my grandfather. His building is just fine. Of course it's going to work for me. And I think one of the key realizations that Alexander had is amateurs are better than professionals at knowing what they need when it comes to building their own life and building the structures around them. And so the timeless way of building, like one of the things he highlights is that we've really lost this in a lot of the modern developments. So that's the intro book to Alexander. A pattern language is really where the philosophy, the rubber meets the road. It's sort of like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, but it's more 250 rules for building. And it's an interesting book because he starts at the scale of, like, how big should a civilization be? And his answer is 10 million people, and they should live in a city-state. And then he goes all the way down from there, right? And then it's like, well, what should the shape of their regions and their towns look like? And then, well, where would you put the town square? Like, how would you orient the main civic functions? And then, like, if you had hills and valleys in this region, where should you build? And his surprising answer is that you should build on the hills and reserve the valleys for farmland. And so he has all kinds of like interesting philosophical ideas that just get more and more concrete. And by the end of the book, he's going into, when you put trim here, it needs to be an inch wide, right? And so it's a wonderful process because he goes from very high level to very concrete. And so what I want to do is talk through a couple specific patterns, either that have really struck me, or that are controversial, or that I've tried to apply as we've looked at this ourselves. Okay, so 104 is site repair. And this one's controversial, I would say. It really took me a while to agree with it. But the traditional way of building is done is you go to the site, you find the nice spot on the site, and then you bulldoze all the trees, and then you have a building. And he says instead, like, no, you need to respect the site. You need to respect the paths that were there, like the history that was here. Find that part of the site that's broken, and because you're going to be investing so much time and energy into this, fix that, rather than taking the part that's beautiful as it is and destroying it. And so for each of these rules, what he does is he has a little sketch. He kind of describes why he put the rule into place, and then he tells you how to actually do it. South-facing outdoors. I think this one might be a no-brainer. But do we build this way? No, we don't. You need sun. Humans need sun. We like to be near the sun. He's even observed that if you look at where people go in a room with big windows, like they will always pull up the chair as close as they possibly can to the window, because you want to have the sun shining in your face. It's the exact same reason, even though it's on the north side, that like these buildings or the specific desks in the coffee shop over here on the north and east walls, like those are the most pleasant places to be because they're closest to the windows. So you have to build with the south-facing outdoors. And so now, okay, let's put this into practice. Here's a site. It's on top of a hill. We toured it, and there are decent views from everywhere. But this section to the east here, it was just kind of gross and built up and swampy and not that great. So we thought, okay, that's the spot we're going to clear. And so south-facing outdoors, well, we have to orient the house so that, and north is up here, we have to orient the house so that the outdoor backyard garden is to the south, even though the approach is from the bottom right here. Okay, so then we roughly laid out, green is where we're going to keep the trees there, the gray box is the house, then we're drawing the principal axes where there are views, and then approaches for driveway and electrical and things like that. And then, here we go. The interesting thing is if you look at that sketch and like what actually happened, it's like remarkably close. Even though I didn't try too hard to match them. I did get the angle of the house off. I set it by compass and I failed somehow. So it's not quite north-south. So let's jump into the next one. This is probably my favorite rule that he has, is wings of light. And it's a bear to work around. He gets into the physics of it, and he basically says there's a certain value of light, and I don't know how many lumens it is per meter squared, I forget, maybe it's 10. But he said, if you have under that value, it is uncomfortable to be here. And so modern buildings, because they're so big and thick, cannot be comfortable in natural lighting. And so what the wings of light rule forces you to do is he literally says you cannot make a building more than 24 feet thick, which is absurdly thin, right? And there are certainly exceptions, and it's not possible if it's a gymnasium. But this one was really, really hard for us to work with because we were building it out of ICF, and so that's 2 feet of concrete on the sides already. And so we had to cheat a bit, and we went to 26. But we're actually trying to build according to the rule. And one of the things you notice, like when you walk into the house, is it's like extremely well lit, just because there's so much closeness to the window, no matter where you are. One of the other rules, I don't think I have it in here, is light on 2 sides of every room. And it's actually really, really hard to apply all of these rules consistently, because hey, if I'm stuck with a long, thin house, and it has to be less than 24 feet wide, and I have to have light on 2 sides of every room, right? It's like there aren't a lot of simple geometries that provide that. But he's not wrong. If you think about good photos, like there's always a primary light source, and then there's one or more like wash lights and secondary lights. And he makes the point. So this is where like the humanism comes in. So imagine, go ahead.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
With 250 rules in here, did he actually build something that encompassed all these? Was that the house you showed earlier, or?
Yeah, so you pick and choose according to what you're able to do and what matches. Because some of them are for office buildings, some of them are for cities.
I actually, that makes sense.
It's like he probably wouldn't want you to like directly violate any of the rules, but it's more you look at what's relevant to you, and it's like, well, this is about a porch on a street. I'm not on a street, so can't do anything with that rule. I'd say there were probably 30 to 50 rules that were like relevant. Okay, so think about being in an office room, like maybe it's a boardroom, and there's a big window on one side. There's a guy sitting with his back to the window, and he's interviewing you or something, right? It's uncomfortable. And the reason it's uncomfortable is that you can't see his face because it's so backlit that you can't really see his expression very well. And so, Alexander gets into this and he says, this is the humanism. If you want to have a good conversation with somebody, you need to be able to see their facial expressions So you need to have windows on two sides of the room to have a good conversation in the room. It's pretty extreme.
No, I agree. There's some truth there for sure.
Yeah. So here's long, thin house. So the reason he wants a long, thin house here is it gives you more privacy per square foot because your physical distance is greater from people at the other end of the house, and then the noise travels less, and like you get the greater feeling of spaciousness, even though the square footage hasn't changed. It feels less crowded. Car connection. Okay, so this one is probably the thing that every modern house gets wrong most. And the second quote there, I think is absolutely true. I think we've all seen it every day. The car entrance becomes the main entrance, regardless of the plan. And so he has other rules that say, if you have a main entrance, you need to use it like the main entrance, or it's not a main entrance. And all of us know exactly what it's like to park the car in a dirty garage, go through the mudroom, past the washing machine, past the dirty laundry, into the back of the kitchen, right? And that is not a noble entrance to a house. It's just not. And so he rather than trying to hide the car away, he has some interesting ideas on basically like putting it in a place of honor, but separate, and doing it so that it's close to the house, but that when you exit the car, you are walking in the front door of the house. And so the way we solved this one was simple. We just don't have a garage.
Where do you park?
Where do we park the cars? Outside. I mean, the house isn't done yet. Eventually, we'd like to build a separate ADU and put the cars on the first floor there.
Without a little carport or something.
Yeah. But like, I was absolutely insistent that like we cannot have a garage connected, and we cannot walk through a back door into the house from the garage. It just ruins rule 113. Okay, 134. I think this one was probably this one. I'm like 50 to 80% sold on it, 20% skeptical. Basically, he says, like, let's say you have a house with a gorgeous view of Lake Coeur Terre. He would say, don't put any big windows looking at Lake Coeur Terre. And the reason is that the view is going to grow stale and old and boring to you. And so he gives this story of this monk's, I don't know what you call a monk's house. There was some monk in Japan, he had a house. And when you visit the house, there's these beautiful old Japanese stone walls, and there's like a little slit window, a crack in this big thick stone wall as you're walking up to the front door of the house. And as you walk by and you look through that crack, you see this incredibly gorgeous vista of like distant hills, mountains, rivers, lakes, maybe the sea, and then it's gone. And he said like that is the way to take care of a really good view. Yeah, stay
going against the law of normalcy, or of where you tend to get normalized to it and take the brain.
Yep.
It was kind of like in Seattle when I lived there for 5.5 years. Most of the time you didn't get to appreciate Mount Rainier.
Yeah.
On a clear day when it popped out, actually I just came around the corner. But if you saw it every day, it was kind of like, So it's kind of I get it.
Yeah.
That's why you should ride a motorcycle, because you can't take your road out, eyes off the road as often.
But when you do, it's beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. See, I think he's right. I just don't like to admit it.
Fair. I can attest to this. I mean,
Yeah.
we walk in our neighborhood. We walk along the lake shore down by Sanders. It's a great view, and all the houses have great window views. I never see anyone in those windows.
Yeah.
They're bored, Whereas I'm excited about it. I walk there and I see it,
Absolutely. That is such a good little lakeshore, like to run along there or walk along there. I mean, when you're visiting, it feels magical, but I think if it would feel like just dull and gray if that's all you saw.
That's right.
Okay, 138. I'm sorry, we have a wrong quote here. 138 is pretty straightforward though. You put your bedrooms to the east so that when you wake up, there's sun. Okay. So I want to talk about how we applied some of these. Okay, so first, here's the house. It's long and thin. That was a rule. We had to deal with it. It has regular windows. If you look at the great room floor plan here, so here's the first floor. What did we do? So off to the top right of the screen here is where the carport will be, where the parking will be for now. And so that forces us, even though there are 2 doors on the south side we could enter by, it forces us to go through the proper main entry just to get into the house. And then where are the best views from this house? They are to the east, and so it's north is up here. They're to the east and the west. And if you look at the house, there's a really small number of windows focused to the east and the west. And that's for other rules that he has, that you basically need to have a huge south-facing face so that it's heated well by the sun in the winter. It's for energy efficiency reasons. It also lets in a ton of light. And then we get the Zen View, right? There aren't that many places in the house where you can see the really good views. And in the great room there, rather than having like a really giant set of windows, we just have a couple relatively small windows. So it doesn't provide this big vista of the vista, it's just a little glimpse. And then, let's see if there's anything else really key here. Okay, so you can see, like the hardest part of this was fitting the whole thing into a space 24 feet wide, where you need to have an entry, and then a hallway, and then stairs, and then another room. And it was incredibly difficult to get it to fit in there.
So is the entry to the north?
Yeah, so, sorry, the entry, it's probably a little hard to see from there. Let me go back. The entry is this guy. So coming in right there. The second floor, we have master bedroom to the east. The kids missed out on the pattern language. They get bedrooms to the west. Alas. Some of these things you just like, hey, Mr.
And who
Alexander.
doesn't get the south window? I mean, that's the question.
Yeah,
It's the most unfavored child. They get a slightly larger bedroom.
Unfavored child gets the north room. It's true. And there's a little room inside of our bedroom for when the next kiddos show up. Just have a crib that's close to it. So then, okay, so this is basically how you would take some of those rules and apply it in a concrete way to a house design. Let's jump into a couple more rules. Or first, any other questions on like these couple rules here?
So at 24, what's the north-south on those bedrooms? You said it was 26, but your walls are, so the interior is still
24.
24.
Yeah, I mean, I'm cheating, but
That's okay.
yeah. He doesn't know. He passed away in 2022. Yeah. First house you're designing, there are definitely some mistakes in this plan, and I'm sure you will find them if you look. But my dad helped us design it, and it was a really wonderful process because he had been an architect for his whole career, but he'd never done any of this like formal training in any of these classical systems, and so it was an experiment for both of us. Okay, rule number 181, his summary on this one is very simple. You gotta have a fire. And, it's just, there's something about the liveliness that causes conversation to be better. It's something where it's so dynamic that you can focus on it continually. It's relaxing. It like solves the lulls in the conversation as they occur because everyone just looks at the fire. He goes through all these reasons why you have to have like a real physical fire in the house. And this is why all the like postmodern substitutes that have the steam or that have the like projected ribbon things, you guys know what I'm talking about? Like, please, don't.
What specifically?
I mean, he would definitely not be in favor of natural gas here, but he would probably also say it's better than nothing.
I mean, even sitting in front of the fire right over here in the coffee shop early in the morning before people get in, it's just that beautiful, comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it. 197 thick walls. So we did this one by going to ICF, but we only got to a foot thick. He actually advocates. Go ahead.
ICF, is that integrated concrete forms?
Yeah, insulated concrete form.
Insulated concrete, okay.
Basically, you take. It's a buddy of mine. His company's factory makes them called Stronghold locally, and
It's called Stronghold.
Well, it's Tony Bremer, and it's EPS. It's like the expanded polystyrene company around here.
Gotcha.
But the brand they work with for the ICF is Stronghold. It's basically like an ice cream sandwich with concrete in the middle and foam on the outside. And so you build the house like it was made out of Legos. They literally click together like Legos, and then you pour concrete in the whole thing. I was terrified. I didn't even show up the day they did it because they were pouring a 22-foot high pour
Wow.
in styrofoam
Mm-hmm.
in one go.
In one go.
I absolutely would have done that in 2 pours, but they did it in 1 pour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was it windows and everything are framed out, or?
Yeah, so what you do for the windows is you cut a hole from the windows and then you put what's called a buck in there. It's like a treated wood box that boxes. I should have put more photos in here on the building process, but.
They are very sturdy and very thermo efficient.
So the funny thing is the R value is only about R20, like 25 total. So it's just a little bit over like the minimum. I think R24 is minimum for Kootenai. But because it's a mass wall, it behaves differently in temperate climates. So we don't get any benefit for that in the winter or the hot summer, but as your temperature fluctuation changes throughout the day, it's a heat sink. And so it helps acclimatize your house to the right temperature in moderate climates much better. So you basically, even if you had like R15, for mass walls, the Kootenai limit is something like R15 or R16. They let you go way lower because the practical effects of having that mass R is just way more effective at keeping you the right temperature. So thick walls. Alexander actually, yeah, R50 you said?
Our strong build, I think their chance like R45 or R50 or something.
Yeah.
But
That's awesome.
totally different though.
Yeah.
Wow.
He
It's like an earth home.
Yeah.
he advocates making walls 3 to 4 feet thick in places.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, if you picture a house that had a 4-foot thick wall, it would feel a little different.
Yeah.
Well, they're big enough to put the unliked child in the wall.
Yeah.
The regular.
207 good materials. He goes through and critiques. This is something we've all seen. Like this standard spec home method of building things has nothing to do with longevity for grandchildren. It has everything to do with matching the build to a 30-year mortgage and materials like T111.
3 years crossed 30 years. I mean,
Yeah, it's like this is going to be done after 30 years. And so we tried to build, there's always sacrifices and compromises because around this time budget was very limited. It's just hard to build right now. But we tried to sacrifice almost everything else for good materials
That's great.
so that the house would stick around.
If you don't mind me asking, what were some of the biggest ones where you like, I'm not going to compromise on?
So the one I did compromise on that I almost regret is the house needs terracotta on the roof.
Okay.
But we went with a your standard asphalt shingle.
Okay.
So that was the other compromise I regret is we used OSB for the flooring, and if I had to do it again based on what I saw, I would have used plywood all day every day.
Yeah.
So those were the two where it's like I regret making those choices. Everything else was pretty good.
Thanks.
So 235 soft inside walls. This is an interesting room to talk about this in. The wall behind us, while it's brick and concrete, it kind of has a soft texture to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he makes the point, it's like he wants his houses to be editable. He wants you to be able to come in and like make changes, and basically the house should iterate or grow over time to suit the person. Now, that we achieve that imperfectly because concrete and ICF are really hard to edit, but that's his ideal.
So that's for refactoring.
Yeah, it's refactoring the house, absolutely. Okay, 239, small panes. This one's also pretty controversial, but I think he's right. You don't want big, empty glass panes. Because it feels too much like a portal that's like kicking you out into the outside rather than like a distant experience of the outside. So I don't know how to describe it
It's
exactly.
directly inverse with the coziness and security that you would feel within a room or a house.
Right.
Because you're not being taken outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you feel a little unprotected or naked. Okay, so those are the last rules I wanted to go through. I want to talk about how do we apply them? So this is the front door. Does anyone know Ugly Duck? If anyone's done building, it's a building store supply in Spokane. They have, it's like what's Ollivander's shop for wands from Harry Potter, but for doors. And so they have a giant warehouse full of doors from companies that have long since gone bankrupt. And so you can buy them at great prices. So we found like solid mahogany doors. It's like,
Okay.
why
Is
would
this
we?
the door that
What's
goes
the
in?
name?
Yeah, this is the door that shows
Ugly
us.
Duck.
What was that?
What was the name of it, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Ugly Duck.
Ugly Duck.
Yeah, they're an excellent store.
So they have like solid wood doors.
They have solid wood everything.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
And it's kind of one-off, it's,
Right.
as they say, they grab and resell.
Like, I'm sure the company that made this, it was in a package that looked like it was 10 years old. My wife Kate saw the door and she's like, this is the one. And they're like, I'm sorry, that's already been sold. She's like, I will find it. So we went to the warehouse and looked for like 2 hours. And we found it. Okay, so here's another one on good materials is we chose to, like, the standard thing to do for soffits would be like hardy board. And we talked to our contractor, John, and we're like, look, it doesn't matter that it's not in the budget. Like, it has to be done. And he agreed. He's like, okay, yeah, you're right. And so it had to be solid wood. And the beams there, while they're not structural, they are solid wood. And so it's like the kind of thing that as it ages should age with grace rather than just falling apart. And then on the inside, a place for the fire is, I was trying to get like a proper Rumford fireplace and it's just impossibly expensive. So I ended up doing a bunch of the work myself to like put in the flue and we'll just have a wood stove. But it's like, we could not sacrifice the ability to have a fire of some kind.
It's gonna be fun, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna be excited.
Save you some heating bills in order to.
And I like that it's in the center of the house, not on the
Sure.
outside wall. It's not like, that must be one of his things, right?
Well, I mean, every fireplace or designer will tell you the column of air that's in your flue needs to stay heated, and the way you do that is keeping it on the inside of the house. Like if you put on fireplaces that are brick and are built exterior to the build envelope are fireplaces for show. Like nobody who ever used a fireplace for heating would ever do that on purpose as a builder.
Yeah,
Right.
because I've seen a lot of houses in New England that have that.
Yep.
But now, I grew up in a house that didn't have that.
Right, but it has because it's supposed to heat, and if that, so what happens is brick conducts heat too well, and so you have a long tall column of air that's cold, and you get all these backflow issues, and it makes the fire hard to start. And you want to keep that column of air hot and inside your build envelope so that it's easier to light, and then of course you get secondary heating as the flue heats your upstairs. And then you can also see like some of the plaster we put in. This one I ended up doing myself, which has been miserably difficult, but kind of fun. And so just for the sake of having like a soft, kind of editable texture on instead of regular paint, we're putting this plaster like all over the house.
How many tons do you have left?
I have like 2 walls to do left.
Nice.
So is that model, is that meant to be, or is that moisture difference, or is that?
Yeah, oh yeah, this is mid-drying process.
Okay.
And so this is what it looks like when it's done.
Sick.
But just, it's like, it has this soft feel to it, and you can see the panes there. It's like the panes don't distract you from the outside. Like the window doesn't need to be totally open. You can still see the trees outside. And
Well,
this
it's the monk, I just walk up and look out.
yeah, exactly. Well, the thing is, this is a closet, so you won't even see
Sometimes
this.
I grab a shirt and look out.
Yeah,
There's a window in the closet, that's kind of nice for that natural light.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, every window or every room has exterior lights, like every closet.
Did he comment on light tubes, because you can bring light directly down the middle of the house, or is that?
Yeah, let's see. He has probably 50 rules about light, which I think makes sense because if you're missing that, you've got nothing. He talks about like the shape of windows. I think one of the rules we failed to achieve that I most regret is window alcoves. And so this is something where every one of us has seen it, and every time we see it, we always love it,
Right.
and we always forget to do it. he talks about like differences in ceiling height, where like we only did that in one place, the great room, because it's like the most open room is 10 feet, everything else is 9. But he says you need to have like multiple ceiling heights, and so as the room gets private and more intimate, the ceiling height goes down and down and down. I mean, he suggests like 7 feet, which I think is stupid, but he suggests like 7 feet for very very intimate rooms. But where 7 feet works really well is in a window alcove. And so he talks about, we've all had the experience, you get like a nice cup of coffee, you sit on the window bench, there is like a 6 to 7 foot ceiling above you, you sit in the window, it's the perfect place to be. We didn't have like the time or money to build them into the great room, so it's like, that got cut. Yeah, cool, well that's the presentation. That's us applying a pattern language in North Idaho, and I want to keep doing it.
Well, I was wondering if we could take some questions and stuff.
Yeah.
Let's do some questions. I'm just going to adjust it now so we get your beautiful face. Does anybody have questions? Otherwise,
Looking forward to coming and see it, maybe?
Yeah.
When there's time.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
my question is, have you, would you say it's more hubris or just a particular fancy you have that you built in the Tuscan style?
Yeah, tough question.
Then a style that fits the pine forests of.
Yeah. Well, I want to euthanize all the pines. So,
Oh boy.
yeah. I would say it was actually an accident. So, we started this endeavor without a particular shape in mind, without a particular design style in mind. And if you look at the earlier, I wish I'd brought them. We have all the flimsies where my dad and I were drawing the rough iterations on the house. It started as like a Cape Cod. And then it became like a Northwest modern with like the black.
I'm so glad that stage passed.
You saw that stage though.
I know.
Yeah. We're talking like angled roof, like a shed roof in sections. Alexander points out, so do you know why a shed roof is not right? Okay. So
you define a shed roof?
Okay, so your typical proper roof has a peak in the middle and the water flows off both sides, and it basically makes sort of a rounded bubble around the people. A shed roof just has a single slope, and so you don't have a peak in the middle, it's just off to one side.
It's very modernish in its design as well.
It is.
is it not balanced? Is that why it's not balanced?
It's definitely not bad. I mean, there's a lot of problems with shed roofs. But the one that he brought up that I never would have thought of, but that I think is exactly correct, and this gets into the deep understanding of psychology, is people don't like crevices or very acute angles. If you picture two walls that come together like a 20-degree angle, it's that's gross. I don't know how to clean it. I don't want to be back there. It's weird. Right here, this section.
So the angle at the bottom.
Yeah. As I'm putting my hands behind this radiator, that's gross. I don't want my hands back there. And so the problem with a shed roof is that you have an angle less than 90 degrees.
Yeah.
So that rule number 90?
I forget. Oh, yeah.
That's interesting. In architecture as well as vehicles or anything else like that, there are certain designs that age gracefully and well, and others that it's a hit and it's a fad, and afterwards nobody wants it.
Yeah. And I'm open to I think the way you get around that with a shed roof is you put a ton of windows there. So rather than feeling like a closed off barrier, it feels like it's open to the outside.
Yeah.
And then you don't have that same closed off corner.
They often use them in kind of roof mass homes that are south facing the natural solar passive heating.
Yeah.
Just because especially if you're up in Saskatchewan or something, the sun's so low that they'll have just to
Yeah.
but there's still potential issues.
Yeah, see, I'd love to, you could do a Northwest modern home according to the pattern language. Might be a little trickier, but you could do it.
I was going to try kind of change the scale of the conversation a little bit.
Yeah.
You're talking about how he says the ideal society is 10 million people living in a city state. Here's how they would utilize the valleys, rivers, hills. Here's how they would organize public squares and spaces. So there's and I understand this impulse, right? There's this impulse of overly planning something is kind of dangerous for a lot of reasons. Central planning is not really efficient. We don't really want somebody to have the authority to tell us what to put in a fireplace in our house in general, and how the trim should be. How, I guess, like, so, like, isn't that, like, doing that, like, planning everything from a macro to a micro level a helpful exercise, or is he saying that's the way it should be done? And if it's the way it should be done, how do you reconcile that with, like, personal choice and different needs, and
Yeah.
making room for people who are never gonna appreciate the sort of finer things?
Yeah, so I think, like, in describing a couple of sample rules here, he's probably coming across as more prescriptive than he would mean to. Like I said, the rules are generative. They're principles to apply, like tools. You pick and choose the tools for a given circumstance. So I think he would never try to tell you, like, this is the only right way to do the building, even if he probably thought it. He'd probably be happier if you figured out the right way to do the building for you. And so, you know, this is more back to the timeless way of building, but I think the principle he'd apply for even like local zoning and design rules and, you know, which colors you're allowed to paint your trim is, I think he'd be pretty neutral to whether or not it should be enacted as public policy or code, but he'd feel very strongly about who was making the decisions. And that it needed to be the people who were local and affected by it, because they actually understood and they knew the answers better than anyone else.
What level of locality, I guess? Because even in a place like Kootenai County, there's so many different levels, right?
Yes.
There's county, city, some federal input, and then you've got your HOA, you've got your direct neighbors. So who should be making some of those decisions? I guess it just depends on what the decision is.
Yeah, you know, I think he probably, you know, there's a couple books I haven't had a chance to read yet. One of them is The Battle for the Life and Beauty of the Earth, which is quite the name.
Yeah.
About his struggles to build like a development in Japan. And I have a feeling that that one would probably get into the details of, you know, here's what it's like to deal with local code. I just don't know, so I'd be guessing.
One of his big rules for how to apply these patterns is to, like, you have to know this. You have to know the patterns because it's a language. You have to have that knowledge in the back of your mind. And then he talks about envision yourself in the space, and then go with what makes you feel the most comfortable. So an example he gives is he's sitting at home in his chair, and he's trying to design this kind of marketplace for some other country. And he's just like sitting at home, and he's envisioning that he's walking down the street, he stops and he buys an ice cream from the street vendor, and he's like licking this ice cream cone, and then he turns to the side, and suddenly he knows right where the alley should be, and then he starts like drawing it out. And so his process is very much just imagine yourself in the space, and what makes you feel the most comfortable is almost always going to be the right answer in terms of human-centered design. And that's a process you can apply both to a particular room in your house and also to navigating around town, thinking about what's the most human, the most comfortable way to navigate around the town. Where would you expect things to be naturally?
The other thing too, you know, just kind of to riff on your point, Daniel, about the regulatory environment, you know, and how we relate to it. A lot of the building methods that you describe, you know, if you go to that page, Chris, that says, you know, it's iterative, it's human, it's tacit,
Yeah.
it's local, it's colloquial. Those were all driven, that methodology was driven by the constraints that were simply natural to that time and place. So there was no regulation required because that's just the constraints of the costs of travel and transport and, you know, supplies moving from here and there, and just the rootedness of societies. And so we're entering into a place where we're trying to recreate the conditions that enable that type of building, and it feels artificial because we're having to kind of, you know, we're trying to recreate those restrictions that then enable that room to operate within that framework. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's our biggest challenge. Is like how do we do that in a way that's still organic and can result in the same generative, you know, process.
Right. It's like the reason that all the buildings were a certain color in Assisi was because the stone was the color there. And the reason they built out of stone was because they didn't have enough trees, right? It's like,
And nobody hated an HOA for having imposed that restriction.
right, it's just,
no restriction,
it's-
just that wasn't available.
they automatically got the uniform, cohesive design because of their constraints. And I think maybe that's one of the challenges we face as moderns, is there are no constraints. You can build a Tuscan villa. Nobody can stop it.
What's interesting.
I don't know that that's 100% true. Like, look at the fences around Kootenai County. Like,
Yeah.
There's plastic everywhere because plastic is cheap.
So, but that's a constraint. That's right. Oh, I see what you're saying.
So I'm saying we
Yeah,
do still have constraints in places, at least for people that don't have the money for nice new fences. Like, plastic is just everywhere because it's the cheapest option.
Yeah, it's just that we because of how our economy is structured, we tend to favor, the constraints tend to be in the direction of that which is the cheapest
Yeah.
and most tied into the unsustainable global supply chains that we
Least likely to be there in 10 years.
Yeah, an example, like in Jerusalem, at least within the old city area, they still require you to build even modern homes and such out of Jerusalem stone. That's not even like in the old city, it's like within the immediate perimeter. And there's occasionally there's like a modern building, but like 95% of it has to be built out of the local stone and everything.
That's
So they've kind of chosen to say, okay, this is what happened for a long time. Though we can import it from anywhere in the world now, we're still going to try to keep what developed here naturally. So they're now imposing a constraint to maintain what was the indigenous kind of process that occurred, even though it doesn't have to be anymore.
Right.
So, I think there's a benefit to that.
the result is good.
Yeah,
You know?
it's very enjoyable. Yeah.
And I think we could at least nod, right? Like, so much of design and architecture and history is just nodding to things that were more necessary before and saying they were right then, but they're still probably right now. Like, we can nod to those constraints here by building with like big, thick timber beams out of local timber.
Which we have plenty of.
Right.
Interesting.
And I should add on like the process that, like, as you mentioned, Randy, the timeless way of building is like pretty prescriptive in one sense. It's like it tells you how to go about building it, and there's like a literal process where you take strings and you take stakes and you like put the stakes in the ground and you walk around and you visualize what's there, and it's like the exact opposite of CAD or sending it off to a drafter. Like, Alexander wants you on site, like feeling like you're going to feel, walking in the rooms before they're there, like doing the things by hand in a really embodied, direct way. He doesn't like all these levels of abstraction, you know, where it's like if I'm putting in a computer program, this is where my living room should be, the computer program probably is going to assume I want 4 square walls. But if I'm out there on the site, like, and I put the strings there, it might be a hexagon or some other shape. And it's just like I'm naturally dealing without those constraints at the levels of abstraction.
I guess in that way, being modern is almost an advantage for larger scale developments, right? Because then you can set up these sort of virtual tours through programming that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So you can lick that ice cream cone in the metaverse and turn and see what you should,
Yeah, I mean, I think we have no excuse for not building the best buildings of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. We just, I guess what we have is licentiousness, not freedom. So we don't have the freedom to build good things. We can do anything, so we do the worst things.
I guarantee you that Christopher Alexander would not advocate for that method. You feeling a certain way in this particular room, because he would talk about textures, he'd talk about light, he'd talk about all sorts of things that you could never experience in that virtual setting. But
I guess how would you take what he's, I mean, a lot of you guys have read it and understand it, so like if you look at the rubric that we have, how would you adjust it based on the principles?
Yeah. I mean, I think the revenue one, he's pretty agnostic to. He could probably give you 250 more lines in your rubric. Are there wings of light? Let's see. Is it set up for limited development? I mean, a lot of these really match principles that he has about making things expandable.
probably ramp up the human relative to the others.
What's the significance of this?
Well, it's just a rough draft, it's a first draft of how we would like to, so if you look at,
Great developments.
yeah.
Like the rate,
Rating.
like current and potential, or just like for potential, or?
Well, I mean, practically it would be for potential, but it would work for current ones too. You want to run current ones through it, and there are certain institutions in our county that have had a lot of success by setting up vetting systems. And so we're trying to recreate that success, basically.
Yeah, I want to give you a taste for some of like the larger scale rules that might be more relevant to these like vetting things. Is like independent regions, 10 million people in city states. The distribution of towns, right? He wants towns and cities and smaller towns. It's like the transect that Patrick talked about. Like you want a gradation of zoning and activity so that you have these dense hearts and then it gradually spreads out into the countryside. Agricultural valleys. So he would rate a lot of our development here terribly for the exact reason that we're using up our prime cropland when we have a lot of hills around here, right? And if we thought about developing on hills, if it's probably all national forest, but think about the like millions of acres of national forest we have to the east. It's like there's nothing structurally preventing development on hills.
The foundation costs about 3 times the house, but
Yeah,
other than that.
it might be worth it. It might be worth it.
John, who
We
owns
were like,
that?
when we first started, like, oh,
Yeah.
$150,000 for 7 acres. Sweet. Oh, it slopes like this. $1 million on the foundation, then like 120 on the house.
So here's a couple, is like community of 7,000, subculture boundary, identifiable neighborhood. Like he maintains that you need to have these distinct neighborhoods like Chinatown, and they literally need to have gates and design aesthetics specific to that neighborhood. So that as you walk into the neighborhood, like Chinatown has in San Francisco or whatever, like, I'm in it, like I just passed the dragons, things are different here. And it gives your city this like local texture that it's not gonna have if it's just uniform architectural homes.
Yeah, it goes back to like the feng shui and bagua and all that stuff and the city design. I lived in Kyoto, Japan for over 6 months and I was an undergrad, and that's like was the capital for 1,200 years, and that was 200 years before Tokyo became the capital. And so that city was developed and established like 800-900 years ago as far as like this is the way it is. And
Their
so
castles have the thick walls.
yeah, thick walls, and then you have gates. Every little neighborhood area does have like gates that kind of make it feel secure and different, and the waterways and the rivers and everything. But yeah, it's when you look at that. I happen to live in like a foreign student dorm. It was in the new part of town, and it was definitely not following these rules. And then you go into like the old city, and you're just like, oh wow, this just feels so comfortable.
It's crazy that they would apply basically the same rules in Japan. This guy's taking inspiration from halfway around the world.
Right.
Yeah.
And he claims the timeless way of building is basically the way everyone built everywhere until recently, when they did it right.
Because like you're saying, it's like given area based off of, do they have heavy snow loads or not? Is it a lot of sun or not? They developed for that area, and then like why did they build longhouses? And was it New England area or something? Like the Native Americans?
Even the Vikings. Like,
Yeah.
The Vikings built the longhouses.
Yeah, which kept them there. Actually, probably under 24 feet wide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably has a lot to do with natural light too, right? So
Yeah.
Right. And feeling distance from your longhouse relatives. Yeah. So I actually think like if you just like glanced at a couple of these, like you'd probably get like 50 ideas for different things that could be put into the rules here. It's like it's that detailed. I mean, it's like it goes into like, hey, if you're gonna have a commercial area, do you want to have like one large box store? Not necessarily. You want to have like the community of all these individual shops, because like the type of community life that it develops is much better, more vibrant. And then he goes into like how they should face each other and how you should enter it, and the fact that it can't be covered because it needs to be exposed. It's like he gives you rules.
We should just add a line that's just, does it do what Alexander would say?
What would Alexander say?
Yeah.
5 out of 10.
Yeah, growing up in Southern California, which is like the extreme opposite of all of this, partly because everyone watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right? So everyone knows about it was designed for cars.
Yeah.
And what I realized a long time when I was younger is like the city isolates people because you are forced into your car versus like a city where you can walk or get onto a metro where you actually are forced into with humanity. You're forced by yourself, and that's why there's so much depression and loneliness, because that happens, and you basically see your people, and you barely even know your neighbors' names, and then, you know, shop at the same place, cause you all drive,
Yep.
you know, 15-20 minutes to get to where you're gonna shop, so, yeah. That's a concern, right?
And I think, frankly, one of the biggest problems we have here is climate. Because it's so cold and wet for so much of the year, it's just really hard to get the outdoor, colloquial, like walking culture that we all would hope for.
I don't know, because like I've been thinking a lot about this, right? Like when I was renting on Spokane Street, and when I was renting in a nice subdivision in Coeur Terre, Luvon off of Windsor, right? It's one of those like archetypes. We never met anybody at either of those locations. We never knew our neighbors. It was except for our duplex neighbors. Like it was just terrible, right? But when I lived in a little trailer park, renting there, and also when I'm living where I am now, it's kind of like village style development in Hauser, I know all my neighbors. And I've been going over time and again, like, how come I knew my neighbors living in a trailer park, but I didn't know them living in like a subdivision? Like, what was it? Because it wasn't like there was front porches, but there was.
Crushes.
Maybe it was the garage. I think that was a lot of it. Like in a trailer park, you're gonna be in your yard. That's where you take off your shirt to go pee, right? You're gonna be in your yard. You're gonna be doing something out there. You're not gonna be very far away from your neighbors. You don't need to say. You're gonna have to know them. And it's not actually unpleasant. I live in a pretty scary.
There's probably more beer, you know.
Yeah,
Cigarettes, like.
It was pretty pleasant.
That's a
You
fun.
throw down with your neighbor every once in a while. I lived in a trailer park in transition between LA and here for 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife hates the way I describe it because our experience was actually really pleasant. And I always make it sound more redneck than it was.
No, he wasn't redneck. He was a Mexican immigrant, multi-generational gang member dude.
Well, there's those two. We just don't have that problem.
Like, fifth generation gang member.
We just don't really have that problem here. Right? Like Lucky Pines is known as being a bad one, and I live there, and it's not like we have those kinds of fifth generation gangs up here.
Yeah.
But then, you know, I moved to like this like village area, and I still know all my neighbors, even though it's set up very similar to like the subdivision.
So what is it about the village? Is it that you are forced outside for some reason?
I don't know.
So is
I think
the
it's.
village, all the homes kind of facing each other, or is there like a central ring, or what's the setup?
I can bring that on Google Maps, I guess.
So I used to live in Hauser. Where is it in Hauser?
You know where City Hall is?
Yeah.
The village right by City Hall. So it's second and first street.
Oh, okay. I think I know where you're talking.
There's only 2 streets. The second and first street.
Yeah.
What makes it a village, I guess?
They just call it a village colloquially. If you go up to Hauser, I guess you see.
Oh, there you go.
I used to go on Julia Drive.
I'm on the other side of the lake.
Oh, I got you.
Which side of the lake?
So on the west side of the lake. So keep zooming in. Keep zooming in.
Whoa.
Where's this? I missed the zone.
Go to the south a little bit. Go to the south a little bit. Okay, so right there actually.
West and then a little north.
So you'll see the trailer park that's next to us. This is the best trailer park in the county because you have your own private beach. Nobody else gets access.
That's not bad.
This is what they call a village, right? And it's not like so right here. It's not like it's all that different than a subdivision. It's not like we're all facing each other either. This is where the pedophile lives.
Of course, he's got the nicest house.
He does. He has connections. He's judge friends. But we all know each other, and I don't really know what it is. I think a lot of it is you can't see it from here. There's a big porch here. This is my porch right here. They're always out in their yard. I think a lot of it is that there's just porches. So when people walk their dogs, you'll naturally see them because you're out there. I think all it is that there's a porch.
You have hideous plastic white fences everywhere?
My neighbor does. Yeah.
So is that the east right there? That gravel lot, does that kind of dead ends there, right?
Yeah, this used to be a public area basically. It was like a resort, so everybody in there could go here, access the lake, and then the pedophile bought it and built his house on it, and closed it off, and then he spreads all his like garbage around. And apparently, all of this land here belongs to the city. He's just put all of this stuff here and claimed it as his own because Hauser doesn't have the resources to stop him.
I got a rule for you.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay.
Okay.
Now it's had a roof for that.
Yeah. 49. Looped local roads.
Looped local roads. Is that what it is?
Yeah. So you notice how you have, I think, 2 loops in there.
Yeah, we do. We have these
Did
two
you
loops,
say
and
loop?
everybody walks this outer loop.
Well, that was
Oh,
my,
okay.
was that the loop is what makes the people community, because they're gonna do that, and because if that was a thoroughfare road, that instead of like a dead end,
Right.
then that would have been a problem, that probably would have cut off everyone, because they wouldn't have gone on that thoroughfare as much with the high flow of traffic. Because it's a slow and it's a dead end, you get hardly any through traffic,
That makes
that
sense.
makes it very enjoyable and safe to walk around.
That's why everyone's walking their dogs and
Yeah.
everyone's outside, because this is the thoroughfare here.
Right.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get hit by a car there.
Yeah, you're not gonna walk over there.
Yeah,
It's
walk
more
my
of a
dogs.
destination neighborhood or village. You're not gonna go in there unless you're kind of supposed to be there.
Interesting. That must be what it is. I always thought maybe it was the front. I still think the front porches play a role, but it probably is more just that it's
People on
circular.
cul-de-sacs, I know in LA, there's a lot of cul-de-sacs, because there's a lot of like irrigation, we call them rivers, but they're actually, they're flash flood channels. And so they form all these cul-de-sacs where the roads can't go through. And everyone on the cul-de-sacs almost always knows each other, whereas everyone just like, a couple hundred yards away down on their straight streets where they're all facing away from, they don't know each other. And so that's pretty common. Like my mother-in-law lived on a cul-de-sac, quarter mile from us, and she knew all her neighbors, and we didn't know anybody in her. Like, and none of our neighbors, like, you'd say that,
So the only thing he adds to the pattern is, or like what you guys have said is like it's the fast traffic, right? You get to see your neighbors, and then he advocates put pedestrian paths. And do you have any pedestrian paths that go outside the? Like, can you walk to the east or the northeast here?
No, what I was talking. So what I've done is I've elected a committee of neighbors, right?
Yeah.
And so we would like to return public access to the lake to the public.
Yeah.
So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to establish a public walkway trail here.
That'd be great.
So there's a way for us to walk, and so that the city's forced to put up a fence.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he says, is you want public paths to the other loops to like build those communities to be broader.
It's good to know. And what's interesting is none of us have read Christopher Alexander in this little area. We just said, hey, we've been down here, we know what we want, and we feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So we wanted a trail.
You didn't need to read it, you just had the timeless way of trailer parks.
It's a great place. It's a great place.
Do you mind, actually, if I don't know if this is gonna be beneficial, but I was gonna text you the link to the news report for Coeur Terre, and maybe you could play it, just because you're already plugged in.
Sure.
It's this new development that's been going.
Like a 4,000 or is that?
Yeah, it's the 4,000 unit one, let me find Chris Walker in my
Oh,
contacts.
so it's the one up between Post Falls and Coeur Terre.
So I messaged it to you, I don't know.
All right, let me see.
Okay, and while he's pulling that up, I think there's one more point on Christopher Alexander and the design patterns that we should bring up just briefly, which is this doesn't just apply to new development. It also applies to incremental improvements to the spaces in which you live. So you should take these patterns and these lessons and this way of thinking and go around your house and go around your yard and start to think about what would make me feel more comfortable, what would make this space more human, and kind of exercise those muscles thinking about it in that context. And then you can take that, what you learn from there, and then it's easier to apply that on a broader scale. Like my wife and I have been walking around our yard a lot in the past few days because the sun has been out. We're thinking of what are we going to do this spring, getting our projects in line, and we're thinking, okay, and this is a place where we want to have a little stone path on the ground, and we're going to build a little knee-high brick wall here to separate the garden bed from the yard, and that's on the south side area, so we're going to have sitting areas. And we're thinking about transitional spaces between this side of the yard and that side of the yard, and we need to have roses growing over here so it looks like a transition. And it's all these same patterns, and it's just applied to a garden area or to the inside of the house. And thinking about how can we simulate having alcoves in the house. Even though we don't have them architecturally. Sometimes just putting a table in the corner and putting a sewing machine on it gives you something like a little bit of an alcove, which is important because then you can have people kind of doing different activities but still in the same room together and that sort of thing. So I just make sure that everybody's taking this and thinking about it on the level of your own house as well, in your own space.
That's good.
And that's another good reason why you should buy one today, because you can start applying it immediately.
The house or the book?
The book. Yeah, no, they're so expensive online.
All right.
Yeah.
Maybe I think those kinds of, like, if you just exercise those muscles and you just wrote about it, that'd be so valuable for the Kootenai Strong blog even. Because not doing this technically publish your spin, you can just say, hey, here's what I know.
Yeah, that's true. We should
Here's
do
what I
some of that too.
do. Like, that's a really cool, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
It's a good exercise.
Alright, so this is the video to play?
This is a pretty good summation of everything, and I'd be curious to see how it applies.
Continues this week with all news stories looking at Coeur Spokane and North Idaho. Tonight we are in Coeur Terre where a battle is brewing over plans to replace a field off Huetter Road with thousands of new homes and apartments. People who live near that proposed site say their peaceful neighborhood will pay the price, and they have asked city council members to reject the plans. Representative Kyle Simchuk shows us what's next for the project.
In Coeur D'Alene's Indian Meadows neighborhood, trees outnumber people, and the streets are calm and quiet. Neighbors want to keep it that way.
There is not another neighborhood in Coeur d'Alene like it.
During a 6-hour meeting last week, which started with a prayer, we consider the needs of those that reside here, those who have homes here. We also consider the needs of those who would like to have homes here. Dozens of people testified against plans to build a new community in this field off Huetter Road, adjacent to Indian Meadows.
I have been kind of heartbroken as I've been talking with some of my neighbors and heard them say that they're glad that they're pretty sure they're going to be dead before they experience most of the fallout that they expect from this decision tonight.
The Kootenai Land Company already owns this 440-acre chunk of land where developers want to build thousands of homes, apartments, and 2 brand new schools. The development known as Coeur Terre would also have room for shops, restaurants, and community parks. All of this built in phases over the course of 20 to 30 years.
The development will invest about $2.5 billion into this community. Senior project manager Brad Marshall says Coeur Terre would create an estimated 900 new jobs and $4.4 million in annual tax revenue for the city.
Kootenai County Land Development is following the California playbook, chapter and verse. Chapter 1, make promises you know you won't keep.
There's a lot of passion involved here because this is going to change the community, and everyone knows that.
Rob Orth is the Regional Vice President of Tomlinson Sotheby's International Realty, which, in the past, has represented Architerra, the company that would build Coeur Terre.
For the next 10, 15, 20 years, the millennials are going to be the biggest buyer pool, and they're about 60% of the buyer pool right now.
He says Coeur Terre addresses the missing middle, a column of housing Coeur d'Alene is in short supply of.
And what's interesting is first-time buyers are pretty much looking at the same house product that seniors are looking at. So smaller, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single level, flat, moderate-sized pieces of property that they can manage and afford to get into or afford to downsize to.
We Indian Meadows residents understand that growth is inevitable. We understand the plea for more housing. However, Kootenai County Land Company and future residents of Coeur Terre will not bear the burden of this project.
The city's planning commission approved the annexation of the 442-acre field as well as zoning changes this October. But in order for Coeur Terre to move forward, city council members have to do the same.
Delay this annexation.
Table this decision.
Don't table it. We've heard enough. Just flat out vote no tonight.
In the end, council members decided they needed more time. Councilman Dan Gookin says he's not against development, but thinks the current proposal negatively impacts the existing neighborhoods.
I think there's some options that.
Dan's pretty close.
Compromises could include restricting access to the east, preventing the thousands of cars in Coeur Terre from cutting through Indian Meadows. The eastern edge of the field could also be zoned as R1, meaning only 1 home per acre, making it more compatible with the existing neighborhood. Council members will consider the new proposal next Tuesday.
We're seeing change across the community here in Kootenai County every single year. No one would have ever guessed this was going to happen 20 years ago.
In Coeur d'Alene, Kyle Simchuk, Prem 2 News.
I used to live right on
Yeah,
Nez
that's
Perce,
Tuesday, February 21st.
Nez Perce and Lancaster, not the Lancaster near Huetter, but the Lancaster near that field. There's a Lancaster that's inside of that community, and I used to live right there, and I used to walk in that field. So, that's interesting, and that would, I think they're against all that traffic cutting through.
They're not really consistent on that.
Because it's really not gonna change the dynamic of that, area. It's not like they're gonna take out all the trees or revamp the neighborhood, but I guess it's all the cars coming through Nez Perce. Because they're gonna be coming from Atlas down Nez Perce and straight in there.
Is this the right place?
I think
That is the right
was it
place.
Archer?
I also
Yeah.
texted you the link to the plans.
Yes, I think that,
The
yes,
site
that's
plans.
true.
Okay.
So we can go between the two,
Yeah.
that is.
Quiet street to like basically a thoroughfare.
Yes, it'll create, I think, both Nez Perce and, as you said, Archer, I think, into more thoroughfares into that neighborhood.
It'll also probably turn, Huetter into a freeway on ramp, I would think.
I think actually turning Huetter into a freeway ramp is inevitable and it's needed because we're already getting backed up as it is with 41.
bypass conversation?
Hold on, but the whole framework of, a lot of, I think what Kootenai Strong folks are trying to communicate here is that making freeways wider and more accessible is actually not the solution to the problem of traffic. It's actually building more amenities in the local area, so you don't need to do that.
It's called the 405 problem.
Yeah.
Skylar, I just wanted to point out
this back in the 60s with the 405 freeway coming from SanFran Valley into Santa Monica area and UCLA. That they were like, and I think I forget the name of the guy who solved the problem. That would never solve it. It was some planner architect guy, I think. Basically said the more lanes you put, the more people go there, so the congestion will never get worse and it will stay at least as bad. And then it will, so now they're at 5 lanes on each side, and some places at 6. And it's stop and go traffic at 2-3 times a day for hours.
So what's interesting is these guys took that into account, right? Because if you look at it, there's this is not going to be a thoroughfare. It's not designed to be a thoroughfare. Same thing for I think this is the other corridor they were talking about. It goes to this roundabout and goes on these little winding things. It doesn't go.
It doesn't go through on the left there?
It doesn't go straight through. It has all these other minor things.
Yeah,
so
I think
all the people that are against it, they are saying put in a exit on Huetter and make it go all the way through. Even at the same time as they're saying, but it's going to endanger our neighborhood.
Yeah, if they make it a thoroughfare, it's going to ruin their traffic.
It's not consistent whatsoever. And they'll also complain, well, there's all these subdivisions here. If you go back to the, I don't want to make you go back and forth, but there's like, if you go back to the map, you'll see that.
I'll go back and forth.
So if you read like North Idaho Slope Road, right, they'll talk about how there's all these quote unquote corrupt deals down here that prevented throughways, and this is why traffic is so messed up in our area, which I think is actually true. I think there's a lot of truth behind that. Spokane Valley, you can go east.
What's that article you're referring to, or book, or?
It's like another blog. It's I can
group that's basically is, right?
They're just looking. They're the local NIMBY group, basically.
What's a NIMBY?
NIMBY is not in my backyard, so they're just like no to everything. They call themselves slow growth people, but if you ask them what they want, if you ask them what they actually want, they're not going to tell you because they don't have an idea of what they actually want. Except for here, what they say is they want to have a freeway on-ramp on Huetter, and they want to have throughways here to make it more accessible. And it's like they don't understand that there's this natural contradiction that they're advocating for.
Right, because the problem with that development down by the golf course is that there were no amenities built within that.
Yes.
And so it creates a problem where everybody has to escape there to get anything they need.
Right.
So a quick question though is, like a city like Amsterdam that's been a prosperous city for a really long time. They have very skinny homes, but they're right next to each other basically, and they connect. And so how would something like that, which seems quite successful because it's endured.
What you're saying is we need canals.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that's nice. I like that. But I'm saying like that home structure, how would that work or violate rules that we were talking about on that level? Or?
Okay.
It's going to be the chapter on Amsterdam.
I can get you chapter and verse. So really quickly on this one, while I'm getting it, Daniel, do you know what these colors represent? Because my immediate question is, where is the non-Euclidean zoning? Where is the mixed use? Where is the commercial? Where is the multifamily? Where's the row house?
I wish I had. There's another map that's a lot better.
You said a row.
Unfortunately, it's not very good. So all the gentle densities right here. These are all like the townhomes. The urban areas and the schools are. So here's the one school. Here's the other school. And then the
up here and here, these are the commercial areas. So right by the schools, which I kind of like, except that this one has like this weird development here. And then you've got all the red little things here, these are kind of a higher density. So they built the higher density away from this neighborhood on purpose. They put the least dense areas next to the neighborhood on purpose. And I still don't like this for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons that I don't like this, but that's kind of how they're doing it. And I think it makes sense. They have the biggest commercial area kind of by the Huetter, Atlas and Huetter down here. And they have another one up.
Are they gonna be local shops, or are they gonna be the franchise commercial stuff, like all the malls have all the exact same stores in them?
It could be local, but I mean, they'll probably end up being franchise.
And look at that practically, like, you're going to probably drive down there.
Yeah.
So because they're not interspersed and you don't have them, I even have I mean, we could even, if we wanted to bring up an example of a development where they've done this already.
What's the scale from the bottom to the top? Is that like a mile or a half mile?
I don't know, it's gotta be at least 2 or 3 miles.
This is 500 feet, is that bar, and those tend to be mile blocks, right?
Where's
I think so.
The bar on the very bottom.
Yes.
Yeah, it's impossible to see.
Oh, okay.
But I think you're right, this is probably at least a half a mile.
Yeah, blocks are usually half mile.
Okay, so if you want to search, Chris, go to Ladera Ranch, California.
All right, same climate.
Go ahead and zoom in there. So you see the red border. We go back, zoom up a little bit. So it's surrounded by these kind of hills. So it's
in a valley, like a little.
Yes, it's in a valley. And so if you zoom in to
the center.
Yeah, so basically it's similar in that, okay, there's the commercial center, see on the right there, and then on the top, if you go up a little, move north a little bit.
Yeah.
So you have the commercial centers kind of on the edges, everybody drives. So despite the fact that it's, kind of, there's a full missing middle scope of housing, there's like senior housing, there's all sorts of densities.
Is it hills, or is it a little hilly?
There's some hills, yeah.
It's not very dense.
So about bicycling, it's kind of low density,
Yeah, so go back to the, I'll show you actually a great example of a neighborhood that's actually really, really nice. So go zoom in the bottom left corner there. Yep, and then to the left a little bit, to the left, zoom in.
Okay, enhance.
Zoom in. So, go back up, back.
Let's get it.
It's hard to navigate.
So as you can see, like they've done cool things, like that little park in the center there. All the porches face into a park. There goes. Actually,
I gotta airdrop my little guy.
Yeah, airdrop right over there between the two parks. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Beautiful.
That is nice.
Oh, look, what kind of cars?
That's what I thought when you were saying village, that if you have like a small local park that kind of belongs to the people that live around it, it creates a nice community space.
Right, so this can be
Especially
very
if it's not
communal. Go on the street there, Chris, between those two pocket parks. Go to the right.
So it's not like secretive.
Go to the right.
Go right. Okay.
Right there.
And then
Yeah.
Drop into the street.
Yep, in between those two parks.
Oh,
So
that
is
looks like
everyone
there's
of those
a
larger grass pads and park.
Yeah.
Yes, so just kind of go.
It's a nice.
Keep going around, all the way around, you'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry. Okay, it's a.
There's like gazebos, there's,
For
go to the other
parties
side.
and things. And
Yeah, so what this does is it creates a space where families can, with little kids, families with little kids can play, very comfortably. People can have, barbecues, spontaneous little play dates, all this stuff. What it doesn't do is it does not reduce dependence on the car.
Right.
Because you're going to be, it eliminates the need to drive to a park to play with your 2-year-old at the park, but it does not eliminate the need to drive to the grocery store. It does not eliminate the need to drive to any number of other shops, what have you, schools even. And so it's really, this is like a better version of what that Coeur Terre would be.
So is there any kind of like bike path to these?
There's
between
certainly
the parks?
are. Yeah,
Or-
so
like kind of between the different parts.
Yeah, so
of
see
Kitchener
right there in the
and
middle,
Street.
where there's trees there?
Yeah.
Those are bike paths,
Okay.
walking paths.
So
this
the
one right
little
here?
white sidewalks are basically walking and bike paths that you can kind of get there without.
Yes, and then
Street.
those are dirt
I see, so it
trails.
connects between
Yeah.
them on
Nice.
next year.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty nice, because then also once your kids get a little older, then you can can send a couple of them together.
Yeah.
Right, pretty safely.
And you can go all the way to, if you zoom out and go to the northwest a little bit, Chris, you'll see there's like a town green there. They're trying to make, go to the right, no, those are baseball fields. So right there, if
Yeah,
you
right,
go
straight down the
Oh,
bottom.
go back, yeah, there we go. So that corner on the right there, drop the guy right in that corner.
You know, are you assuming a gender on the little?
Drop the individual. So this is kind of like, okay.
Well, that's beautiful, I'm glad they kept that.
Big oak, yeah.
Hundreds of years old, yeah.
Hey, it's got a fancy entrance.
To the
Yes,
neighborhood.
which everyone drives into.
What they did what?
Which everyone drives into.
So with the bike paths, why do you think people drive?
Because you can't, well, maybe some kids ride their bikes.
But why do you think the adults don't?
Yeah, I mean, there's various reasons why not to, but I mean, I think that it's just convenience. It's like, who wants to huff it up, up and down a hill?
Plus, everyone, imagine this neighborhood's driving fairly far to work and back.
That's right.
So they're already in the.
Right, because they don't have the commercial and office space that's built out here, So again, it's woefully inadequate as far as creating a traffic, a traffic situation where all the traffic is being absorbed by the amenities of the place. Even despite all of the work they put into this, from like kind of a new urbanist sort of perspective.
Now, is the problem that everyone in the neighborhood has to drive to those amenities, or that they drive outside to get those amenities elsewhere?
That's a good question. I mean, I think for the most part, there are the amenities there. So like if you zoom into that little commercial park on the left,
Those are good
which
shots.
you flipped around, but there's
office buildings.
there's some office buildings. There's like Home Depot. There's any number of things that are there.
So in some ways, the community then, even though it's driving, it absorbs its own traffic inside of itself.
Yes, so that is a positive. It can absorb a lot of the traffic inside itself. As you can see, there's like a little church there on the top left corner. So
Look at that tile roof.
So, quick question on the tile roof. Why do you feel that tile roof's good and Wolf Lodge on the side of a mountain?
Well, it's not on the side of the mountain. It's on the top of the mountain.
I see, because it's like a monastery. On the top.
Hey, Chris.
To be with the Tuscan style, it has to be tile.
Gotcha. Okay.
Would you look up Verado in Buckeye, Arizona?
Oh, see,
It's a
look,
master plan.
there's this thin windows up there, like in a good Tuscan style.
It's a master plan community. I've walked in it and been in it a bit when I was down there. And I think it has some similar aspects of what you guys are looking at.
Where is this one again?
This is Buckeye, Arizona. It's called Verado. And it's a multicultural, multi-generational development. And it has it has a lot of trees, walking paths, and they're building it out with even more infrastructure as far as like amenities and stuff like that.
they have pretensions of having some agricultural activity, right?
Oh, snap.
Unfortunately, the story of Buckeye for forever.
Yeah.
It's very similar to it.
Yeah. So I'm really curious for the Coeur Terre one, what is the ratio between like people that can live there versus jobs that it can support?
Well, they said create 900 jobs, those probably aren't all within the community, but.
That's jobs making it,
Yeah,
or jobs, that's construction
making
jobs,
it.
so that's only until built. But they're saying it takes 30 years, so they're
Well,
gonna say those
they're
are
also
easy for
talking
them.
about like restaurant jobs and
The
coffee shops and
schools.
the other things, the schools, so they're.
So the question is
Look at that
who's gonna buy there? Is it gonna be people that are coming here, or people that are already here?
It's gonna be the children of the people that are already here that can't afford anything else.
It's gonna be the Spokane and Seattle and California people.
Yeah.
So Joel, to your earlier question,
Yeah.
Rule 38, row houses. At densities of 15 to 30 houses per acre, row houses are essential, but then he talks about how to make them not dark on the inside.
Cool,
So-
which I think they've done that, because I've stayed in a few of them, and
I mean, the way they did
Pretty
it
well done.
in San Francisco that was great was you just opened up a pocket, like a negative column on the inside,
Yeah.
and so you had these columns of light that would go 3 rows down, or 3 floors down, and you can open it and get natural cross-flow ventilation. I mean, that's what the row houses downtown Coeur Terre get totally wrong.
Side note, has anyone been to the Noah's Ark in Kentucky?
No.
Amazing. They actually did, that's the design that they picked, was louvered roofs things in the middle that could drop light all the way down to the bottom. And from the top to the bottom, it's architecturally, it's really pretty cool. That's what he said.
Yeah.
Back to it.
But that's why I want to invite Brad, the guy that was in that thing, hopefully I can get him to come next month or maybe 2 months from now, and then we can ask him those questions, because it'd be good to know some of these things. I mean, the sad part is, right, the 21st meeting, I have a suspicion it's just gonna be a rubber stamping thing. They're going to annex it into the city.
Yeah.
But that's all they're discussing. So how it actually gets built out, that's still, as long as the ground isn't broken, up in the air, it can be amended and changed. Which, like, why do you want to bring this area up? Because you brought this area up for a reason. Is this like another example, or?
It was just examples of like where they're trying to build master plan communities, and I don't know if there was any. I wondered how this kind of fit. Did it kind of fit into some of the similarities we've been talking about? Because it's one of those communities I've been in, and I thought was actually really nice when I was there.
It looks like it's missing the commercial side.
Yeah,
It's the same,
that center park seems like it'd be hard to get to because it's in the middle of a big traffic ring.
Oh, golf course.
It feels very nice on the ground. I've been to a number of these new
Okay.
urbanist developments. It's just that the question is
There's
whether or
no
not they're
commercial.
actually functional.
Right.
And I guess what's the criteria that we're thinking is a good criteria for functionality?
Well, at least from my perspective, is the community as self-contained as possible in terms of not creating a bunch of additional traffic needs, and then also not creating ultimately a revenue suck in terms of the infrastructure maintenance and the utility and all that stuff as it ages.
Well,
Is it
thanks
number
for
right?
answering the question. What would be a revenue suck? Like, what kind of things would indicate that?
For the city of Hayden, one of the city council members recently mentioned that for like every house that, I don't remember if it was house or acre, but like for every residential thing that goes in, it draws an extra, it takes money out of the city, and when commercial goes in, it adds money to the
From the perspective of the infrastructure costs, that utilities, all that
You're
stuff.
saying so the city spends more potentially for that home than whatever comes back.
Over its.
Right, yeah. You think about all the utilities that have to go into a suburban neighborhood, because they're running, they're running water and sewer through there. There's sidewalks, which are really expensive.
It's the cost of maintenance.
Yeah, and then so usually they get the developers to chip in for putting it in, right? It's part of the, yeah,
So
exactly.
the developers have to
But
do
then-
it, or the cities do it to like make a new subdivision?
The developers bear most of the cost for putting in the infrastructure. And that's how they get it approved for the city.
They use it as a
But
bargaining.
then 20 years, 10, 20 years later, things start falling apart, pipes need to be replaced, pavements cracking, and the revenue you get from the property taxes in that suburban neighborhood does not support maintaining the infrastructure.
And this gets into a deeper issue of what is productive property, and households used to be productive, and so productive activity in households would fund the maintenance
I
of.
mean, Netflix isn't productive.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but this is like the key thing though, I think, right? Because like, unlike federal government, cities and states have to come by their dollars honestly, they can't just print them. So you have to, if you're building something that in 10 to 20 years, like Randy was saying, takes more to maintain than you're bringing in, then you're setting yourself up to be Detroit. And this is why so many American cities are being hollowed out from the inside.
Yeah.
And this is what really frustrates me actually about Southern California moving up here and demanding our residential. So you had it really nice in California, and you go into demand that they build exactly what you wanted up here, drawing off the community that's here and forcing them to pay for your lifestyle.
I mean, everybody
It's
uses.
unfair.
Look, Californians are used as a rhetorical device in so many different settings.
Oh, it's not rhetorical.
I saw in that meeting, everyone saying that development was a California development. Is that true?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
California style?
Yeah, they said they're using a
Chapter
California verse.
Oh, the California playbook, yeah.
So is that which California?
No, I think the California part was the line promising a bunch of stuff to the city and how wonderful it's gonna be, not the actual design.
They were characterizing the whole project as a California
okay.
development.
Playbook kind of thing.
Yeah.
But well, whatever you want to call it, New Yorkers watching. Really, what it is. I'm sorry, Joel.
It's just that actually everybody who moves up here in the last last 30, 40 years.
Really, it's not really the Californians, and I hate to say this because it's not true for all boomers, but it's true for most boomers. The boomers have a certain way of life. And when they grew up in the 60s and 70s,
Yes.
the ideal was you would move out of the urban area, you'd move to a suburb, that was the dream life. And suburban living is great. Like, I grew up in a suburb. My parents lived that exact same dream, and I enjoyed it. But I always knew, I would always watch these movies where little kids go and bike someplace and have these crazy adventures. And I was like, why can't I do this? And I didn't really understand why I couldn't do that until I got older. And I was like, because there's no place to go. Because they drained all the wetlands and they destroyed all the natural side. They didn't respect the side at all. And if I were to go to a road, I just get run over.
Talking about stand by me.
Well, so like, I don't know. I find a lot of the R1 residential arguments to be supremely selfish.
So the R1 is 1 acre per home? That's like
and to me,
4
that's
times
like
the
a
Zone for each lot, each site being just a residential single family.
Oh, R1 meaning one
Yes.
family.
Yes.
Are you sure? I thought
'Cause I
R1
heard
was
someone say
1 acre.
R1 1 acre, but that
They
R1.
said
Yes,
that's
they can be built
Yeah.
inside. The sites can be half acre, quarter
Okay.
acre, 1 acre, but R1 is like the only thing.
Yeah, I think you guys already probably know that, but I mentioned before that I was talking to the new county supervisor guy that just got elected, and he was saying that the main thing is the annexation, because then it pulls it out of the county, so the county can't do any county master planning, so then you can kind of pay off the city through a bunch of things that you promised them. The city somehow has the ability to annex it from the county, like, I don't know if the county can vote no or not, but so then it pulls it into the city, and then the city's gotta deal with the developer, and then then there's no county-wide decision process, and that's why all of these places in Rathdrum and everything that have been encroaching on the farmland is because the actual annexation allowance that where you can annex county land.
Yeah.
You know, so part of it is if you're wanting to put a pause and think about it a little bit.
How can the county stop the annexation process?
That's more of the thing that would be the most leverage, and be like, okay, can there be a county law? And again, I don't know which law supersedes what, whether, I know usually county.
I know it's weird though, because they have all sorts of state level stuff.
Yes, yeah, just like Panhandle Health and things like that are, because when I was in California, I was like, how do you take back communist, cover, and I'm not joking, but, taking over county. And I realized that, okay, well, the state is kind of a thing, but you have to have the sheriff, you have to have commissioners, you have to have the school board, and those are 3 key positions, because in California, the commissioners control the health department. So you don't have to have a health department, because the commissioners can say, sorry, health department, you're not implementing crazy stuff. And, but here, I moved here and I go, oh, we've basically given away our health department to Panhandle Health, which is state organized. And so
Same with the Board of Education. The
Yeah.
State Board of Education has way more power than it ever did at the county level.
Which actually surprised me when I moved here, because I was expecting it to be a county level, and so partly is putting the power back more into potentially the county, and then focusing the efforts on that as the ability to kind of move things in a positive direction. That's taking it back from the state, taking it back from the cities into a county thing.
I just want to say one really inflammatory thing. I'm going to drop this guy somewhere on the map.
What's the blue thing when it pops up? All those blue lines? Is that?
Where you can go. I think
cool.
this level of density is great.
Yeah.
Is this San Francisco?
Yeah. Because my apartment. What did you say?
You're just trying to get 10 million people into a city.
It's
I-
800 grand and 800,000 people.
So I used to live in this apartment block here.
Ooh, that building is more than 24 feet wide.
Hey, it wasn't perfect. So you want to know the best thing about this? This is like California brokenness at its best. Like, it's one of these 2 columns there. It's like 1, 2, 6 units. Okay, guess what value it was taxed at? So this is a 6-unit apartment complex, $3,500 a unit a month. What was it taxed at? What was the value of that building?
Like the building owners, what were they taxed on?
You're
What
saying
was
the
the
county
tax
tax?
appraisal of the building?
Yeah, what was the tax appraisal?
Well, this is just a Prop 13 issue, so.
Well, shh.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know what Prop 13 is, but it must be multi-million.
So it prevents the.
Hey, we want to guess.
500.
500,000. Okay.
500,000?
Well, what did you say? You said 500?
Yeah, dollars.
Well, no, like the assessed value of the building.
Well, it's newer than $500. It would have to be a much older San Francisco home,
Yeah.
like a 1907 home.
Like, what do you think the
I would
bill?
say multi-millions of
Yeah,
dollars.
if you're
If
pulling
you pay
in
3,500 times 6 per month.
Per month.
That's a lot.
There was a little thing called Proposition 13. that was
$400,000.
$400,000.
I think it was 1978 in California.
Yeah, which is actually saved a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's basically saying that you can't increase the property assessment until it's sold. Because I mean, when I was in Seattle, I saw they don't have that. Seattle loves their property levies. And I saw 3 old ladies on my street that had lived there for 40 years in their little 800 square foot brick home that was built in 1947, have to sell their home because they got their fixed income and their husbands had all passed away.
Yeah.
And their fixed income had priced them out of it because they kept raising the property tax.
Yeah,
Well, it's slave tax. It's surface slave tax.
You think you own your house, try not paying your property taxes.
Yeah.
It could go up every year, but it was some very, very low amount. It was like 1 or 2%.
Extremely low. Yeah.
So my parents, they had their house paid off. They lived in Orange County. They bought it, in the 80s. It's
And it
like
was $500.
they're doing good.
Yes.
Even though they have a fixed income, they're retired.
Yeah,
it's
it
like-
really keeps a lot of people staying in their home on a fixed income.
Yeah, but like I would love more row houses. I mean, these are all multi-million-dollar houses here.
The problem in California is it was people.
You can build beautiful row houses.
Proposition.
Yeah, I would love more row houses like that too.
I love that these all have the bay windows.
So you like the density, but what about it fosters the
Community?
relationships and community?
Well, this is great because I get to do a little self-history. We're going to do directions from 44 Montgomery.
Is this still oriented north-south or no?
Yeah. Okay, so we used to live in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. I lived here. I worked here. I would just walk there every day.
How far is that?
1.7 miles. It's not bad. So you get a ton of exercise, and the coolest thing is you're going through Little Italy, you're going through Chinatown, you're passing right by this beauty. Oh my goodness.
Isn't it something going on with it?
No, that's the Millennium Tower.
It was what?
The Millennium Tower is the
Oh,
one
the
that's leaning.
Millennium Tower, okay.
And so the coolest thing was I knew on this street my florist because I walked by her every day and said hi. And so whenever I wanted to get something for my wife, I went out of my way precisely 1 foot. I stopped and I said, hey, what can I do for $10 today? And I got something great and I kept walking. And so Kate and I, we would shop at the Trader Joe's, and the Trader Joe's was here in this building, right? And so it's a half-mile walk home for her, but she did it, right? It was just how you lived.
That was before you had kids.
Well, this was with a kid. Ronan was one there.
It's called a shopping cart. They have a little fold-down thing that grandma used to use.
That's
Yeah, like all the older Chinese ladies have this
Take a
great
half mile away,
shopping
that's-
cart.
Oh yeah, they're amazing. Like, where did you buy that? They don't make them anymore.
So like in Hong Kong, it's the same thing, right?
It's like, how far do you have to take it away from the shopping
Because
center?
you live so close to the grocery store, you can take your groceries home in a trip, and it's actually great.
I would just walk by on the way home from work, and I just pick up like, hey, I need eggs and this and this. Okay, I'll pick up those 2 things. Done. It's like a couple blocks on my way.
That's why I like that kind of density too.
They're small blocks too. They're tiny blocks.
And like the funny thing is, San Francisco, if you compare it to major cities, is not that dense. And because I mean they have their dumb issues, but one of the things they've done is they've restricted all the building to like 4 floors or less, and that's actually a rule here, 4 floors or less. So like the vast majority of the city is low density by like California standards.
Not by California standards.
No, it's
By
not
Northeast standards.
Yeah,
Okay.
not by California standards, but like
By Bay Area.
by Chicago
Yeah.
or
Yeah, New York.
New York and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess not compared to like most Californian cities. That's fair.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is it's like a lot of this is lower density probably than the dumb apartment buildings we have here.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Right. It's just like we can have all the dumb apartment buildings, or you
So,
could.
quick question is with the apartment buildings here and all the homes, is it, as far as you know, is it just being built because that's the land that was available at that moment when they wanted to buy it and then invest to build there? Or is, you know
It's
what I mean?
mostly being built because the people that are in charge of the cities are friends with the developers.
That's what I thought.
And,
they are.
the not in my backyard people, the slow growth people, play directly into their hands without knowing it.
Right.
But you can never convince them of that because they are ideologically driven.
Right.
How so? Can you spell that out a little bit?
If I did, I'd be a globalist, so I really can't.
want that.
Yeah.
Is the idea just that they oppose any sort of small incremental developments, and so therefore?
They think that the only form of America that can possibly be America is a suburb, right? So if you have a city, that's because globalists are trying to control you.
Okay, so then how does that translate to large apartment blocks being built?
It's not their problem. So they want to stop large apartment blocks from being built too.
Right.
They just want the homes that are like 800, 900,000 plus or more to be built because they can afford it because they moved here from not California.
Right, but how is opposing all dense development directly playing into the hands of, you know, that apartment complex being built on 4th and, you know, right past Midtown?
How does opposing all? I guess what's your question?
You said that, you know, those who oppose the NIMBY crowd is playing directly into the developer's hands, and then therefore apartment complexes.
Because look, I was talking to the guy.
How does that connection get made?
I was talking to the guy that was in charge of Coeur Terre, and he was like, "Look, if we don't build it the way we're building it now, and it gets some money, that's whatever. What's going to happen is someone else is going to build it a lot more dense, which actually I'm kind of in favor for.
Yeah.
Right. So they don't realize the second order consequences. Either you get a lot basic C, and you get a lot more of these really low density places that require large amounts of debt to purchase, and that can only be owned by retirees, and that are very dependent on global supply chains, in which case they lose. Or you get much more dense areas because the developers can steamroll their way through anyway.
Right.
There's an economic answer to this though. It's when you oppose any form of incremental development, you end up with housing prices skyrocketing because you're not allowing, more converting into a duplex or building ADUs or things. So housing prices keep going up. There's no increase in supply by gradual redevelopment to be a counterbalance to that. And when housing prices keep going up, it becomes economically viable to build a large high-rise apartment building because now they can charge $1,500 a month for a studio apartment.
If they oppose the previous development, why couldn't they oppose the apartment complex?
It depends where, like one example.
I'm just playing this.
They're fine, they're good questions.
I'm still thinking about this one because some of it's happening now, but there's like a 6-acre spot in Hayden that they wanted to bump up to like, I don't know, I think eight dwelling units per acre. But it's in the middle of a suburban neighborhood surrounded by single family on all sides.
Sure.
Everybody showed up to city council to complain, and it's like the one thing I've seen city council vote down because everybody showed up.
Sure.
Something over on West Hayden, fewer people showed up, people didn't complain, it got approved, it's happening, right? It's got townhomes, it's got some single family. So I think some of it's who shows up and complains.
Right, and I think part of what you're asking though is what makes the NIMBY crowd actually opposed to this, or?
More so, how does the NIMBY crowd play into?
Yeah, what is the attitude due to the actual what actually happens?
When the developers actually, like, they put in a lot of money and they don't always succeed, so when they do, they've got to put in enough stuff to pay for it. And I think more density, the more units they can sell, the more money they can make.
I think that's the right answer. When people are showing up and protesting, they're really just increasing the transaction cost for any development here, which means it's harder to do any development because now you've got to go through all these processes and these hearings, and so that strangles the small incremental development in favor of these big projects where it's worth spending 2 years.
Can you
arguing with
describe
the city council
what the incremental development is?
Yeah, it's for example, if you have a single family home downtown Coeur Terre, it was built in the 20s, it's falling apart a little bit, maybe it's time to remodel and expand it, or maybe you want to build it into a duplex, or if it's falling apart, you could knock it down and replace it with a sixplex. That's a kind of incremental development. It's not a big, like, we're going to change this huge parcel and stuff. It's just coming in and saying, let's upgrade this one lot to the next level of density because of where it is. That's what makes sense.
Or a garden, have you guys seen those courtyard style apartment complexes where it's all single story, kind of.
There's some beautiful ones in parts of LA and parts of Seattle and all that kind of stuff, and you drive by, you're like, that's really cool, and then they're usually built in the 20s or 30s or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
My cynical take is most of the people here opposing stuff just don't know any better, so they just haven't seen it. But the other cynical take is the same thing is going to happen here that happened everywhere else.
So,
Which is not desirable.
Right.
no, so a good example, incremental development, maybe if you want to bring it up, because this would be something, again, I think showing people examples, like including these as photos or whatever, just go because I'm familiar with it. Go to Fullerton,
Big in the Whitehurst neighborhood.
Pomona Avenue. Yeah.
While you're going there, my thought was kind of why I brought up Amsterdam, because that's kind of like one extreme of kind of density versus like, to me, it's having grown up in the R1, 6 to 8 homes per acre.
It's a big place.
It's just not great. I mean, so I'd rather squish it together to Amsterdam and then have park spaces that everyone can enjoy.
Yeah.
Versus you have your walkway around the corner of your house and you have maybe 20 to 30 feet in the back of your house that your kids can play with, and then they don't go to the neighbors and they can't go play out and there's no parks because they're all just, because everyone wanted their own space.
Yep.
Right.
So it's either like you keep the 5-acre lot or you smash it down to like a dense thing and then make public space that you can do that's convenient.
Yeah.
That in between spot that is like the really not great spot.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then that's, and I imagine then what was the term used, but the cost of utility management?
Cost per acre.
Cost per acre is improved because the same big pipe can service, 8-unit
Right.
smash
yeah.
down as it could 2 houses or something.
That's why it comes to me for the city.
But the thing is, that's where I was saying, like, what's decided what lot? It's just that person was on their way out or died and they decided to sell, the family estate decided to sell that lot, and the builder's like, cool, this random big apartment out on Prairie, we're gonna build it. And we know people are here and they're just gonna pay a lot for it. But it's just a random apartment building that's massive, and you're like, and so it doesn't fit into any kind of like community or